Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Before we begin today's discussion, wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. I hope Santa brings to you all the luck and happiness that you need right now. The first article that we will discuss today from the Hindu newspaper talks about the Modi government's evolving foreign policy, specifically with respect to India's neighborhood. Now, just a couple of days back, we discussed another similar editorial written by Suhasini Heather in the Hindu newspaper, where she particularly criticized Indian government's policy with respect to our neighbors. Many of you in the comment section also wrote that the Hindu usually reports negative news against the government and they always criticize the government's policies. So now, as if the Hindu has heard your prayer, there is an article which, on the contrary, talks about the good things that the Indian government is doing with respect to its foreign policy specifically. The author here, who teaches at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, says that the Modi government, especially in its second term, has realized the mistakes that it was committing in its foreign policy in the first term, and now they are doing much better as compared to earlier. In the first term, the government's foreign policy was guided more by the Hindutva ideology and was very aggressive towards the smaller nations in our neighborhood, virtually not giving them any choice but to agree to whatever our whims and fancies were. But the second term of the government highlights that the government is now trying desperate measures to win back our neighbors, be it Nepal, be it Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or Myanmar. In the first term of the government, the relationship with Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, which have usually been good friends of India, got pretty complicated due to a lot of aggressive policies. For example, when Nepal was making its new constitution, India artificially imposed blockade of Nepal, although we never officially agreed to it. Nepal is a landlocked nation and depends on India for a lot of things, including oil, milk, fruits, and vegetables, etc. But at that time, because Nepal's new constitution was not something that the Indian government appreciated, we stopped sending these trucks inside Nepal and said that the protesters inside Nepal are not allowing the trucks to go inside. Similarly, during the passage of the Citizenship Amendment Act, a lot of our ministers said unpleasant things about Bangladesh and how the Bangladesh citizens are trying to come to India illegally at any cost. That also left a bad taste between the bilateral relations of India and Bangladesh. Then in Sri Lanka elections also we tried to take one side and thought that that would improve our relationship. However, in all these cases, we in fact allowed China to come closer to these nations, which historically has not been the case. The author here says that the government now seems to be learning from the mistakes that it committed in its first term specifically. The author now gives examples of how proactive India has been in the past few months to make right the mistakes that we did earlier. In September, when India was holding the presidency of the United Nations Security Council, the Council adopted a resolution recognizing Taliban as a state actor in Afghanistan. It was a great initiative because the entire world at that time was not sure about how to deal with Taliban. This showed the proactive nature of the Indian foreign policy. Not just this, our active participation in Quad and in the global climate change negotiations also indicate that we are not here to sit as mere spectators, but we want to take an active part in what is happening around the world. Similarly, India has not compromised on its own interest. We have finalized the decision to buy the S 400 missile system from Russia despite constant threats of sanctions being imposed by the US. We have also successfully balanced relationship between such pair of nations which are not on good terms with each other. For example, we are on good relations with Israel as well as the Arab states. We are on good relationship with Iran as well as the US, and our diplomats have done a great job in balancing that. The one small suggestion that the author has here is that the number of Indian diplomats that represent India around the world in international organizations and in other countries is still much lower than some of the other countries. The number of diplomats or the people working in the IFS services is very low as compared to countries such as US or China. This would allow India to have a much better representation, to have more ideas, and build pressure at stage whenever required. The same balancing act that India has been displaying with respect to the Middle East part of the globe, India is doing the same with respect to China. It is no secret that the problem between India and China at the border is still unresolved. However, while the government in the initial stages took decisions which were not really logical, for example, banning a lot of Chinese apps, now the government has realized that our relationship with China has to be seen differently in different spheres. For example, our border issues might still be unresolved, our armies may still be facing each other, but on the economic front, we have to still maintain robust relationship with China. And that is why, despite the military standoff at the line of actual control, the bilateral trade in fact has gone up. It has increased by over 62% in the first half of 2021, which in itself is a record. When the Modi government first came to power, they showed a lot of despise, especially towards the free trade agreements. In fact, in 2014 itself, when the government first came to power, the government had announced that we will review all the free trade agreements and see if they are helpful to the country or not. In line with that assessment, in 2019, India did not even become a part of the RCEP, which was led by ASEAN, where India was all through a part of the negotiations. In fact, in the past 7 years, as per the author, the only free trade agreement that India has signed is with the ASEAN group in 2014. Although, even in that agreement, most of the background work and negotiations were done by the previous government. But now the government seems to be changing. India is scheduled to begin free trade agreement negotiations with UK and Canada in 2022 and also with the Gulf nations. Not just this, they are also trying to initiate such talks with the European Union as well. The government has understood that the aim of making India a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25 can only be fulfilled if our focus is on FTAs, because that will lead to a much more increased trade between India and the other countries involved in such agreements. Now, as I said earlier, this article is trying to balance most of the critical articles that we have about India's foreign policy in the Hindu newspaper. But too much of sweetness or too much of spiciness, either way, can ruin the taste. So, let me give you a slight counterpoint to what is being mentioned here. There is a very interesting pattern in India trying to become a regional leader. That in any multilateral organization, wherever India is the biggest partner, that is, wherever the onus is on India to take the group forward, that group has never been successful in India's history. And I can give you multiple examples. Let's take an example of BIMSTEC, SARC, Mekong Ganga, non aligned movement. All these are groups where India, being the biggest country involved, had the onus of taking the discussion forward, bringing new initiatives, having regular meetings, but none of these groups have fulfilled the mandate that they thought they would do and have not brought any successful results. Let's take an example of Mekong Ganga. Now, Mekong Ganga Cooperation was established in the year 2000 with six nations. Apart from India, it had Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Now, the expectation was that it would allow India to influence these countries, use their market to sell their own products, and improve its standing in the ASEAN group. However, no regular meetings were held, not a lot of importance was given, and as a result, what happened? These five nations together went to China and said, okay, let's form a different group altogether. So now there is a group called the Greater Mekong Group. The Greater Mekong Group has China and these five nations, which is doing much better as compared to the Mekong Ganga Group was supposed to do earlier. We have an example of SARC also, where India again is the largest country by far. Now, the arguments that we usually give is that SARC has not been a very successful grouping because Pakistan does not allow us to work properly. So, as a result of this, we formed the BIMSTEC, where most of the SARC countries are represented, but Pakistan is absent from there. BIMSTEC has seven members: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Thailand. Again, although the group's intention was good, but no concrete outcome has been achieved with this group so far. Same is the case with the non-aligned movement, where India was one of the founding members and it is one of the largest grouping in the entire world. But India still has not been able to utilize that platform. In fact, now India does not give it a lot of importance and has not taken a keen interest in holding frequent meetings of the non-aligned movement. So again, it shows that while our intentions are at the right place, we want to become a global and a regional leader. But unfortunately, our track record highlights the fact that whenever the onus is on India to draw a group forward and to do something significant inside the group, we have not been able to take that initiative. The next article that we have talks about the counting of Omicron infection cases in India. The author here says that the pace of Omicron infection in India is misleading. If you see the news today, India has somewhere between 400 and 500 Omicron cases. Now, the author says that this number is misleading. And the reason for that is there are very few labs in India which can actually test whether or not a person is infected with the Omicron variant or some other variant. And the number of infections are low because of that specific reason. The author says that the genome sequencing process to identify whether you are infected with Omicron or not is very complex, and there are only 38 labs in the country which are equipped to detect that. These labs are mainly run by a group called INSACOG, Indian SARS-CoV-2 Genomes Consortium. Because there are only 38 such labs in the country, only very few samples are being sent to them, and of those samples 400 to 500 have tested positive already. So let's not assume that the number of cases are very low, because there may be many more people who are infected with this variant, just that their sample did not go to the required lab. The author also takes an example of the calculation. The article says that as per the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, in December, India performed about 12 lakh RT-PCR tests every day, out of which 0.5% turned out to be positive. So by the average of about 12 lakh tests per day, let's assume that in the first 2 weeks of December, the total tests that were conducted were 1.7 crore. Out of which, if you assume that 0.5% people are positive, then close to about 80,000 people should have tested positive in this region. Now, out of these 80,000 people who have already been tested positive, only 1% of these samples are being tested to those labs that can check for Omicron. In short, only 800 samples would have been taken to these labs. Out of these 800, 200 already tested positive by the end of the second week of December. Meaning that out of all the positive cases that we are finding in India, in short, one fourth of them are coming out to be Omicron cases. That is what you have to look at, and not the total number of cases, because our testing capacity for Omicron specifically is still much lower. Yes, you also have to take into consideration that most of the samples that we sent to these labs were of international travelers only, because most of the cases of Omicron are coming from outside the country. But there have been at least 10 cases where people without any travel history have contracted the Omicron variant. Meaning that, again, if you calculated anywhere between 5,000 and 25,000 Omicron patients would be in India right now. The best case scenario is of 5,000 patients, and the worst case scenario can be of 25,000 patients till the second week of December. Now, it is up to the scientists and the people who are running their statistical models to refine these numbers. But one thing is for sure, that the number of cases of Omicron that we see are extremely underreported. Not because the government does not want to report it, but just because the number of samples being sent to those special labs are extremely low right now. The government, as per the author, should also pay special attention to cities such as Delhi and Mumbai, which see a lot of overseas travelers coming in, and most of the samples taken from these cities specifically should be sent to the specialist labs. Now, since the article makes a mention of INSACOG, that is Indian SARS-CoV-2 Genomics Consortium, let's look at what that is exactly and what does it do. It is a national multi-agency consortium. Consortium means a group of agencies or people working together, set up by the Indian government in December 2020. The aim was to monitor the genomic variations in COVID 19 which are causing this virus. Initially, there were 10 such labs, but now they have increased their capacity to about 28 labs. These labs are responsible for genome sequencing, for identifying which variant of concern is found most in the Indian population and the potential variants of interest that we should look into. The idea behind setting up these labs was to see how the virus is evolving and how is it building its immunity against the vaccines. It is set up under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and is a joint initiative of the Health Ministry, Department of Biotechnology, CSIR, and the Indian Council of Medical Research. The main objectives of this consortium is to ascertain the status of variants of interest and variants of concern in India, to establish sentinel surveillance and surge surveillance mechanisms for early detection of these variants, and to determine the presence of genomic variants in the samples collected during super spreader events and report the increasing or decreasing trend of deaths or positive cases in the country. The next article again focuses on COVID 19, but it focuses on the new medicines that are coming up and are being given approval throughout the world. In one of the earlier CNAs also, we did discuss about Paxlovid, that is the new antiviral drug being developed by Pfizer to treat the COVID 19 infection. And now the big news is that the US FDA has granted emergency use approval to not just one, but two antiviral drugs for certain category of people who are at high risk. One is obviously Paxlovid, and the other drug that we are talking about is Molnupiravir, that is developed by Merck's Pharma. Both these are normal oral pills, means they do not have to be taken in a hospital only, they can be taken while you are at home. They are meant only for people with mild moderate disease, and the course has to be started within 5 days of the symptoms. While Paxlovid of Pfizer has shown much higher efficiency, it is suitable for anyone above 12 years of age. On the other hand, Molnupiravir, which has a lower efficiency, is meant for people above 18 years of age. As you can see, the article tells us while Paxlovid has a 88% efficiency in the trials that were conducted, Molnupiravir only had an efficacy of 30%, and that is why is to be used as a second option. The US FDA specifically says that Molnupiravir is recommended when alternative treatment options are not accessible or clinically appropriate. Means in the first chance, take the Paxlovid pill of Pfizer. If that is not available, then maybe you can try the second pill. It is also to be understood that just because there are two antiviral medicines that have been given approval against COVID 19, they do not work or provide you the protection like vaccines. Antivirals cannot substitute vaccines, and thus the first line of protection has to be that every individual that is eligible should get vaccinated as soon as possible. Also, since the course of these medicines has to start within 5 days of the systems, it is also important that our testing capability and the turnaround time should improve significantly. There is one more point of concern here. If you remember in the earlier CNA, we discussed about the Paxlovid medicine of Pfizer and also said that Pfizer had decided that they will allow 95 low and middle income nations to produce their medicine without any patent so that they can sell the generic version at a much lower cost. It is expected that India will also be one of these nations. Now, the problem is when you have a generic medicine in India that you do not have to go to the hospital for, it is very, very easy to go to any medical store, ask them for a tablet, and they will give it to you without even seeing a doctor's prescription. That will lead to a lot of misuse of such medicine, which the government should prepare itself for. For example, in most of the countries around the world, it is not possible to just walk into a medical store and ask for a medicine and you can just pop the pill. It happens specifically in India and other developing nations. Thus, we have to work against that also. Just because a medicine will be available here at a lower price doesn't mean that it should be freely available to buy at any medical store. Now, let's look at these two medicines a bit more in detail. How are they different and what is their history? The article, as I said, makes mention of two medicines, that is Molnupiravir and Paxlovid. Both of these were already granted approval in the UK and now they have been granted approval in the US also. Molnupiravir is not a new drug. It was a drug that was initially made to treat influenza and has been slightly tweaked to now treat the COVID patients. It interferes in the replication of this virus inside the body and thus reduces the severity of the disease that the person may have. Merck, the company that is producing this medicine, is expecting to produce 10 million courses by the end of 2021 and has already signed deals with multiple nations such as the US, UK, and other European nations. Paxlovid, on the other hand, which is supposed to be much more efficient, is developed by Pfizer. It also inhibits in the virus replication process inside the human body. Now, have these medicines been tried in India? The Merck medicine specifically is ongoing trials in India as we speak. 5 Indian pharma companies, including Cipla, Dr. Reddy's Labs, Emcure Pharmaceuticals, Sun Pharmaceutical, and Torrent Pharmaceuticals, announced that they are collaborating to try Molnupiravir in Indian conditions. In fact, recently, Hyderabad based Optimus Group also announced the completion of phase 3 trials, which gave satisfactory results, and thus you can expect these medicines to be given their emergency use approval in India as well very soon. The next article is about the Union Minister for Ayush, that is Mr. Sarbanand Sonowal, the ex-CM of Assam, inaugurating an Ayush hospital in UP along with the UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. The 50-bed hospital will be set up in Ayodhya and the foundation stone was laid for the same. Ayush, as you know, is a system of alternative medicine that is indigenous to India. It stands for Ayurveda, Yoga and Naturopathy, Unani, Siddh, and Homeopathy. The recently established Ministry of Ayush has the responsibility to promote these systems throughout the country. Not just this, a total of 500 new Ayush wellness and health centers were also inaugurated in the state. Apart from Ayodhya, there will be 6 other 50-bed hospitals that will come up in the state in the cities of Unnao, Shavasti, Hardoi, Gorakhpur, Sambhal, and Mirzapur. Now, the Ayush alternative medicine system has been at the center of this government's focus ever since they came to power in 2014. The government, in fact, in September 2014 had launched the National Ayush Mission. And recently, the government decided that the mission shall continue until 2026. It was first launched under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare because at that time the Ministry of Ayush did not exist. But now this mission is run by the Ministry of Ayush specifically. It involves expanding the Ayush sector and its facilities to promote holistic health to Indians, address the gaps in the existing health systems, and also provide Ayush related education to people across the country who want to make a career in the same. The National Ayush Mission had some compulsory and flexible components. Compulsory components included providing Ayush services, setting up Ayush education institutions, ensuring quality control of Ayush drugs and medicinal plants. Flexible or voluntary components involved setting up Ayush wellness centers comprising yoga and naturopathy, telemedicine, introducing innovations in Ayush such as public private partnership and voluntary certification scheme to be carried out throughout the country. The purpose of this mission was to provide better access to Ayush healthcare facilities throughout the country, to improve Ayush education, and to focus specifically on reducing communicable and non communicable diseases. In order for the people to have much more belief in this system, in March 2020, the government approved including Ayush health and wellness centers into the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Means the Ayushman Bharat Yojana that provides you 5 lakh free health insurance cover. That cover can also be used now if you go to Ayush health and wellness centers. So hopefully, since the world has already taken the concept of yoga from India, the other components of Ayush will also see a major demand throughout the world. The next article is about the Chief Justice of India visiting his native village and highlighting the importance of mother tongue. That gives us a chance to look at what initiatives do we have for promotion of mother tongue in education and other fields. The Chief Justice of India, Justice N.V. Ramanna, said that the mother tongue could be added to the Sanskrit verse Janani Janma Bhumisha Swargadapi Garyasi. That is, mother and motherland are superior even to heaven. He said that his native language, that is Telugu, should not be forgotten. It's a great language, and the speakers of Telugu should try and promote it as much as possible. If you have been following the news, you would have seen a few weeks back the Chief Justice of India also made a statement saying that I am not very proficient in English and I am much more comfortable in my own native language. He also made a statement that there is a need to strengthen the Telugu language, culture, and traditions. So let's see what has the government done to strengthen not just Telugu but other languages that we have in the country. In 2020, the Union Education Minister set up a task force for preparing a roadmap to provide technical education in their own mother tongue. Now, that is done because the National Education Policy of 2020 suggested that teaching in regional language till class 8 and enabling teaching the curriculum in the language of the student will be much more beneficial. Now, there have been multiple research and reports that have suggested that teaching a student in his or her own mother tongue is much more beneficial for various reasons. Number one, it promotes diversity. Second, it allows the parents at home who might not be very comfortable with English to also contribute to the child's education. Thirdly, it also empowers the child and makes him or her believe that his own identity is accepted throughout the world. And that is why, in many countries across the world, such as France, Germany, Russia, or even China, which has over 300 languages, we see that higher education is offered in their own mother tongue. While India has opted to go in the direction of offering most of our educational programs in English. The challenges that we mainly face with respect to this policy is the lack of proficient teachers, not enough reference material, and not enough technological assistance. The government has identified these challenges and has started multiple initiatives for the same. For example, Commission for Scientific and Technical Terminology is providing grants for publication of university level books in the regional languages. We also have National Translation Mission, which is implemented through the Central Institute of Indian Languages and is trying to translate university and college textbooks into languages of the 8th schedule. This debate of giving push to mother tongue and native language is not just in India. There are global efforts being made for the same. For example, the UNESCO adopted the ULU proclamation in 2018, under which there must be efforts made by the nations and the regions across the world to protect linguistic resources and diversity. The UN General Assembly proclaimed 2019 as the International Year of Indigenous Languages. It aimed to preserve, support, and promote indigenous languages at national, regional, and international levels. You're also aware of the safeguard provided with respect to languages in the Indian Constitution. For example, Article 29 gives all the citizens the right to conserve their language and prohibits discrimination on the basis of language. Similarly, 8th schedule recognizes 22 languages, allowing you to choose any of them as the medium of giving examination in the UPSC Civil Services examination. The Right to Education Act also says that the medium of instruction, as far as possible, should be in the child's mother tongue. The same, as you know, has been emphasized by the new education policy of 2020 as well. These were the articles we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, list out the challenges faced by Ayush system with respect to its integration with the mainstream healthcare framework. Suggest ways to overcome such challenges. Second, one nation, one language has always been a flawed idea with respect to India. Do you agree? Discuss. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.